This one says to factor the trinomial by grouping. And we have 8x squared minus 10x minus 25. Now, if the leading coefficient of the trinomial is a 1, like just plain old x squared, then I wouldn't use the grouping method. I would just use trial and error. But in this case, using factor by grouping will actually be a little easier. Now, the basic steps for factor by grouping are here as follows. What you do is you multiply the leading coefficient, which in this case is 8, times the constant, which is 25, and you take that result. So you take 8 times, it's a negative 25 actually, and we get a negative 200. So that's really the first step. The second step is you find two numbers whose product is equal to a negative 200, the number we just found, and whose sum is equal to a negative 10, the negative 10 being the middle coefficient. So you find two numbers whose product is equal to a negative 200 and whose sum is equal to a negative 10. And you just go through and, well, 200, we can multiply, let's say 20 times a negative 10. 20 times negative 10 is negative 200, but they don't add up to a negative 10. So we scratch that one and we just switch them though. If we do negative 20 times a positive 10, that multiplies together to give us a negative 200 and add up to a negative 10. So that's step 2. Step 3 says you split the middle term using the two numbers we found in step 2. So here's what that looks like. We'll take the 8x squared minus 10x minus 25, and we split the middle term so that it looks like this. We have 8x squared. Using these two things, we take and write minus 20x plus 10x and then minus 25. So all we did was we took this negative 10x and we wrote it as a negative 20x plus 10x, because after all that does add up to a negative 10x. So the original trinomial is equivalent to this one. This one has 4 terms. So the last step is to take this 4-term polynomial and factor it using the method of factor by grouping. And the factor by grouping method is you take the first 2 terms and group them together, 8x squared minus 20x, and then plus the second 2 terms, 10x minus 25, and you group those together. So we call it factor by grouping. Then we factor each of these little groups. We factor the GCF from the first group. We can factor out a 4 and an x from that first group, which would leave us with 2x minus 5 in parentheses. And we factor out a 5 from this second group, which would leave us with 2x minus 5 in parentheses. Now we look at what we have at this point, and you see that there's a 2x minus 5 in this term, and there's a 2x minus 5 in this term. So the GCF for these 2 terms is 2x minus 5. So we can factor that out. So we write down this, in fact, so this is actually the greatest common factor for those 2 terms. So let's write down that GCF. Whoops, let's don't write down the word GCF, but let's write down 2x minus 5 times, now if we're going to divide out 2x minus 5, or factor out 2x minus 5 from this first term, we're going to be left with 4x, plus, bringing down this plus sign right here. And if we factor the 2x minus 5 from this second term, we're going to be left with the 5. So the result is 2x minus 5 times 4x plus 5. And that's the correct factorization of the original polynomial, 8x squared minus 10x plus 25. And of course, you can always check your answer using the FOIL method. And you'll confirm that if you FOIL 2x minus 5 times 4x plus 5, that you get back to the original trinomial.